You are listening to Resilient Life, the podcast where we explore the power of resiliency. I'm Nikita Ross. It is my hope that listening to this podcast will give you the tools to connect with and increase your resiliency. So join me on this adventure of self-discovery and self-love. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Resilient Life, the podcast where we explore all things resilient. Today, we have a wonderful guest joining us, and I would love for you to introduce yourself because you can do it much better than I ever could. So if you can give us your name and your chosen profession, please. Sure. How long have you been in the field of education? Carrie, and I know you and I talked about this when we weren't in front of a camera, but I just want to say it in front of a camera. That is amazing to dedicate so much of yourself to educating little minds, younger minds, molding, shaping, preparing basically our future. I think that is absolutely incredible, especially since we're in a place in education nationwide where it's difficult to bring on and retain our highly qualified educators. And so, thank you. Of course, I have the first question for you. How do you define resilience?
I think of like the ability to move above and beyond change, obstacles, and setbacks in life.
And with that definition, do you think that you are resilient?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I've experienced a lot of trauma in my life, and I have encountered many obstacles, whether that was in my personal or professional life. And so I absolutely see myself as someone who is resilient. Sure.
I love that. And what advice would you have for someone who either hasn't identified their resiliency traits yet or they don't think that they're resilient? What advice would you have for that person?
Sure. I think my advice for others is to find a healthy outlet. Read, write, run, volunteer, find your niche. From my experiences, it was much easier for me to pick up a bottle of booze and drink myself into oblivion than it was to actually face my fears. And we must face our deepest fears. We must dive deep into our past, our traumas, choices in life, and figure out how to heal that version of ourselves. I think we are an incredibly resilient species that is destined for greatness, and we must take it upon ourselves to figure out what it is that works for each of us, or we will live a life of loneliness and regret.
Carrie, I love that. I think that's very optimistic. And I think we share that. That's a huge part of why I have this podcast, is because I also believe that we are an incredible, resilient species. You said something that I want to follow up on. You said that it's
Sure.
important for us to face our fears. And I understand that it's going to be a little different for each person. But if you were to give a couple of examples of what it looks like to face your fears, because that, I don't know, if when I think about it, it can be interpreted differently for different people, or people may not even know what that means to face your fears, which is why we as humans turn to food, sex, drugs, whatever it is, to avoid, to numb facing our wounds, our trauma, our fears. So will you please elaborate a little bit more on what does that look like to face your fears?
I think that looks like digging deep and really looking at what is it that I'm afraid of? Is it the fact that I'm going to go through this major change in my life? Or is it the fact that, change came upon very recently and very suddenly and very abruptly, and you're having to shift as a result of that? So like an example for me, I don't know if you know this, Nikita, but I'm a breast cancer survivor.
No.
And my big fear was dying when I was diagnosed. And so I received a phone call from the radiologist who was like, I hate to do this over the phone, but we noticed that you have ductal carcinoma, which was cancer of my milk ducts in my breasts. And
Mm.
so I was really afraid of dying. And so it took a lot of encouragement from my family to go to my appointments because I was so afraid of having to go through chemo and whatnot. And luckily, if there is a luckily radiation or chemo, I simply had surgery and a simple bilateral double mastectomy. And so, like, having my family there to help me kind of face my fears when I went to my appointments was really important. So I guess facing your fears is also making sure that you're being honest about them and sharing what it is that is frightening with others so that you can get that support.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Carrie, thank you for sharing something so intimate, personal, and
Yeah,
vulnerable.
you.
Thank you for that. I'm very happy to know that you are doing better. And you said luckily, if there is a luckily, and I would say the word survivor means that there is a luckily. And I'm so happy to hear your story. I've actually know a couple of other breast cancer survivors, and they also survived, but they had to go through a lot more. And so I'm always in awe of the strength, determination that it takes to face death, Carrie. And it's interesting because one of the people I know who is a breast cancer survivor recently said that they shared with me that they've been in a depressive state for a while now because they haven't shaken that fear of death. And I think it's something that people who have not gone through it, Carrie, can take for granted. And I would say I do. If luckily, I wish there's wood around me. I've never had to face my own mortality and the strength that it takes to get through that. And I'm so grateful that you have family to support you through that. I think that is awesome. And it just makes me respect you even more. I already respected you and adored you a lot already, you know that, but it just grew some more. So thank you again for sharing that.
Sure. Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Luckily, I am trying to think of when that was. I am 7 years cancer free. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
I think that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank
That is
you.
fantastic. Thank you, Gary. How do you, speaking of surviving, how do you celebrate yourself?
Oh man, that's the question I didn't prepare for. I think one of the ways that I honor myself is by spending time outside. I really enjoy the outdoors, and so I honor myself by hiking. My family's really big into off-roading with our Jeeps, and so um that brings me a lot of happiness when I'm outdoors, and I love, like, I love the mountains and whatnot. So anytime I can escape to the mountains or even in the desert when it's not 90 degrees outside, go hiking and whatnot. I think that really brings me a lot of peace. It's my spirituality, so it makes me feel alive.
Being one with nature, being out in nature, experiencing, appreciating the beauty of nature
For sure.
when it's not a 100-degree day,
Yeah.
right? I love that. Carrie, what made you smile today?
I think being with you on the mic here and sharing a little bit about who I am. I don't normally get to talk like this. You know, usually it's like I share stories and stuff, but being able to be in your space with you is an honor. So I'm glad to be here.
Listen, we just started. Please don't make me cry. I have to make it through this. Thank you for those kind words. I appreciate
Sure.
that. Oh, I like this one. And I cannot wait to hear your answer to this one because I have no idea what you're going to say.
Okay.
What is the theme song of your life?
Yeah, this one I didn't have to spend much time thinking about. I am a big fan of the Chicks, and the theme song that they sing is Taking the Long Way. And they sing, I've been a long time gone now. Maybe someday I'm going to settle down, but I've always found my way somehow by taking taking the long way around, taking the long way, taking the long way around. And then later in the song, they say, no, I could never follow. And I find those lyrics to sum up a lot of the choices that I've made in my life because I've always paved my own way. I've made a lot of choices that have felt like the long way around because I either placed myself in my own way or have felt like I've made some impulsive decisions with some really heavy consequences. As a result of that, for a long time, I pushed a lot of people away in my life because I didn't think that I needed their help or their support. for. And that said, I also believe that some of my choices in my life have led me in the right direction, but just maybe at like a different pace than others. My life journey has been one of a lot of growing pains and self-discovery, and it has been a journey with a lot of bravery because I have not compromised myself for anything or anyone.
So many things you said there. I think from my perspective, I feel like you summed up life in general and not just your life. I think we all go through growing pains and self-discovery. That is the nature of life. And I thought about that when you said the lyrics to the song, because I think sometimes we get this idea that life is short, fast, simple, easy if we stay on a path, if we do it right. And I don't think there is a right way to do life.
No,
I
I don't think
think
so
that
either.
it is that long where we just don't realize it. And so it was so hard not to interrupt you when you were talking because I was like, yes, yes. I love that perspective. And I just want to add that I think or reiterate that I think that is life in general. And even though you're like, that's been my experience, I've made decisions that I didn't love or that I had to suffer the consequences for. That is life. I don't think there's
Yeah.
anyone on this earth who can say, I've only made wonderful decisions. We grow, we
Yeah.
learn. And so I love that answer. It just fills me with joy to hear my thoughts about life validated through you sharing yours. So thank you for that wonderful answer. Oh, this one is going to be a new one for you that you didn't prepare for, my educator. What have you learned about yourself recently?
Ooh, I think that I am in the process of learning that I have the ability to be patient.
Mm.
This year has brought some loss, both in my personal life and in my professional life. And typically, I'm very like, let's tackle this problem, let's get through it, let's do this, and this very quickly. And I'm learning that I have to really slow down and trust happening, whether that is experiencing grief from the loss of a relationship or experiencing a major change in my job. And so, yeah, I think really like working on learning to be patient with myself. And probably in addition to that, also forgiving myself for mistakes and forgiving myself, offering myself some grace.
That was one of my questions. We're going to come back to that.
Okay.
So I think, and when I was a kid, I used to always think that every older adult, like 40 plus, they were naturally patient. And I thought it just came with age. But I'm learning very similar to you. I am also working on patience and surrendering and not trying to control a situation, not fighting, but just being like, it's okay. Life is going to be okay. Change is okay. Do you think that it does come, it's a natural progression of maturing? Or do you think it is something that we as humans have to develop and work on as you are currently and I am currently?
I think for some people it's really natural as they age. And I think that with me, in some ways, I'm definitely not as impulsive as I used to be. And so that's I think part of it has been maturity. But I also think that for me it's really intentional because I know that about myself. I'm not the most patient person in the world. And it's much easier to be patient with my students now at this age in my life than it has been in the past. And I think that, you know, part of that is the fact that I'm a lot calmer than I used to be when I was younger. So I think the maturity piece is, I would say both. I think
I
the
like that.
maturity piece is
And I,
definitely part of it, but I
yeah.
think also it's like being intentional and coming into a situation where you know a kid is upset or you know a friend is upset and not just wanting to solve the problem right away, just sitting back and listening.
Yeah, I like that. I think you're right, and I hadn't thought about it that way, that it is a little bit of both because we do become less impulsive as we age. Hopefully, I've met some
Yeah.
people who have not, but ideally we do. And then there's this thing that you've hinted around that is so to my beliefs and values. You've hinted on it twice, but you haven't directly beautifully said it. And so I want to label it. I'm a big labeler. And
Mm,
you're an educator, you're also a writer. And so you have a more extensive vocabulary than I do. So I'm going to give you
yeah.
the word that I use. And then if you have a better
Okay.
word, please share with me.
Sure.
So, 2 times you talked about being intentional and being patient. And then you talked about facing your fears. And to me, both of those require insightfulness. And I feel like when I said it's a core belief of mine, I strongly believe that if we as humans were more insightful and paid attention to ourselves, what we're feeling, what we're thinking, where we want to place our intentions for our growth, 2 things you just talked about, I think we would be better, as you said, giving ourselves grace. And as you talked about, being able to extend that grace to others like students or friends or family. I would love to hear your thoughts about that. Would you use the word insightfulness? And then do you agree or disagree with my summation of how important insightfulness is?
I don't know if insightfulness is the right word. I
Okay.
think I think I see it as, well, I guess maybe it's insightful. I see it as being really self-reflective,
Mm,
and I think for me writing has really helped me make it through many challenging times in my life, and I'm constantly thinking about what my moves are and how I did A, and so the reaction from this person was B, and okay, I need to backtrack a little bit there. Maybe I need to apologize, a little bit more thoughtful or intentional in my thinking in terms of my response and how I'm reacting. And so I really see it as like this self reflection. And, we're constant, like, I am by no means perfect at all. And so I'm constantly reflecting on what I've said, what I've done to elicit certain reactions out of people, whether positive or negative, right? Like, I think that goes both ways. And so for me it's that reflective aspect.
Do you think that we as a society of human beings, regardless of all those categories, if we were all each more self reflective, we could be kinder toward ourselves and others?
Oh, absolutely. For sure. I think that we're such a fast-paced, impulsive society that we do not slow down to think about what our fears are, or what it is that we are trying to overcome. And like, I think we're very intentional in how we plan. A lot of people are. I just think that we could be more self-reflective.
Yeah,
We definitely need to slow down a little bit, for sure.
yeah, I agree. I agree with that 100%. Um, no, I don't want to do that one yet. Where do you feel most peace and calm? Is it nature?
So as I was stating earlier, out in nature, the mountains, but also I think also with my family as well. They bring me a lot of joy, and we have worked through many traumas, many challenging situations. And there have been time periods in my life where I have not spoken with my mother or spoken with my sister, and we're in a place now where, like, we're forgiving, we're kinder to each other, we offer that we all so desperately need. And so I would say that my family brings me a lot of peace in conjunction with nature as well.
I think that's another thing, Carrie, that you have that is wonderful. I would say that there are tons of people who don't have that experience where their
Mm,
family is their safe place or their place of peace and rest. So count yourself lucky, blessed, whatever your beliefs are. I
yeah.
think that is a wonderful thing to have. And so congratulations to you and good job,
Thank you.
Carrie's family.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure.
Let's do, okay. What is something that you are proud of?
I think that, so my friend Selena says that out of all the people that she knows, she doesn't know anyone else who works as hard at improving themselves as I do. I've been through countless hours of therapy. I have lived through some incredibly traumatic and challenging times in my life, and I have a lot of people that I wish I still had in my life. And I think by working on myself through therapy, through my writing, with people who help elevate me, I have become a version of myself that I'm proud of. Like, I had this teacher in high school. Her name was Mrs. Kissel. She was this tiny, petite, I think she was Italian, and she had a celebrate diversity poster in her classroom, and she was one of the most welcoming people in my high school career. And I always wanted to aspire to that. And I think that I'm there. I think that kids share a lot of deeply personal stories with me because they feel like they can trust me, and I'm honored to hear their stories and I want to know their stories. So I think I've become this version of myself that I'm really proud of, someone who is humble and kind and willing to forgive myself for my flaws. And I think it takes a lot of courage for us to be able to look at ourselves and do the hard work so that we can be that best version of ourselves. To think that I do a little bit of that hard work on myself every day.
Carrie, that was such a perfect, I like my word insightful, but I'm going to use your word self-reflective answer. I think that was
Thank you.
absolutely wonderful. I love that you have a teacher who impacted you so much so that you wanted to be that kind of teacher who has a wonderful impact on students. And I've said this several times that when I think about people who have helped build me up as a human, I think of teachers. I've had teachers who have torn me down, but I like to focus on positive. And so I've had a teacher in particular who really had high standards for me. And so that like really made an impact on me. And I think we don't, not to get on a soapbox about education, but I think we don't give our educators enough credit because so many of our educators are responsible, as I stated at the beginning, for molding, creating, developing these young humans, inspiring them. And so thank you for that. I love that. And then there's something you stated that you have people around you who build you up. And this is a question that I try to ask people who have that great support system. How did you build it? And what advice would you have for people who are wanting to build a healthy support system?
Sure. So I think that I really seek out people who are kind and patient because in my life, for a long time, I didn't see those things about myself. And so I love working with people who are really open minded and appreciate diverse perspectives. I think like one of my closest friends, Moon, sees things very, very differently than a lot of people. And I love that about her because I can go to her with any problem and I know I'm going to come out of it feeling like it's not solved, but I've got that support system and I've got a perspective that I don't normally consider. And for me, seeing other people's perspectives has always been really challenging because I'm such a type A Aries personality. And so I'm so strong minded that sometimes it's just really hard for me to set back and see that. And so I seek that out in people and I seek out people who really want what's best for people and humanity and really want what's best for kids. And what was the second part of your question?
What advice do you have for people who
Oh,
want
right.
to develop that for themselves?
Yeah, I
How
think
would they? I think you actually answered the second part because
okay.
you talked
Okay.
about how you did it, but it also can be how other people can build that to seek out, not to put words in your mouth, but just you said you sought out a specific kind of personality. But that was the second part is what advice do you have for people who want to build that?
Yeah, I think we really, as hard as it is, and as much time and sometimes as much money as it takes, we really need to know ourselves. And I think really in knowing ourselves, we seek out the things that I would like to think that a lot of us seek out what's missing in ourselves and we seek that out in others.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's going to help someone, and we don't even
Yes,
know
I
who.
hope so.
When do you feel like you can be your true self? Is it only with your family? So I'll clarify this question. I have a couple, as most of us, a couple of roles that we feel I'm on this professional setting. I'm a parent, I'm a daughter, I'm a sibling, blah, 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 blah. I'm a mother. When I feel like I am like my truest self and none of my other parts are hidden is when I'm with my daughter and my bonus daughter because they get my quirky, my awkward, they get like just me, raw me. They get no manners me. Like they get like full, silly me. And so that's when I feel like I can be truly myself, is when I'm with my oldest daughter and my bonus daughter. Do you have a time where you feel like you can just be like whatever things that we may not let out? Because we're at work, right? And so if you have a
Yeah,
potty
yeah,
mouth and you're educating kids, you can't let that potty mouth out. And I'm not
yeah.
saying that's you, but that's just an example. So what's
Yeah.
yours?
I think when I am playing some kind of game with my niece and nephew is when I'm my true self. And sometimes I censor myself and sometimes I need the reminders from my sister. Hey, let's watch the language a little bit. But I think playing like we play Monopoly, we play Sorry, we play all kinds of board games, we do puzzles, we play basketball, we play, Mario Kart. And I feel like I think I'm my best self at that time with them because I'm a kid again and I get to tap into that inner child that I don't get to tap into very, very often. And so I think anytime there's some kind of playfulness involved, whether it's with my niece and nephew or my students and I are playing Uno or we're playing poker or whatever the case may be, I think that there's something about that aspect of play that really allows us to show who we are.
I agree, Carrie. And you're actually making me, I'm going to change that question to play and inner child. Thank you. That was so,
Yeah, you're
thank you.
welcome.
Yeah, I agree with that. Oh, you ready for this one? This is another
Sure.
one that's not on your prep sheet.
Uh-oh.
You ready? How is your
Yep.
self talk? Are you challenging negative thoughts and encouraging positive ones? And I think I
Ooh,
know the
that's a
answer
tough
because you've
one.
hinted at this, but I just want to hear your
Okay.
official answer.
This is a tough one. This is something I've struggled with my whole life. I grew up in a family where there were a lot of consequences for behavior that
Mhm,
was not acceptable. And so, my dad was in the military, he was in the Air Force, and then my mom, for the first part of my life, was at a stay at home mom. And then my parents divorced when I was, I want to say 10 or 11. And
mm,
all of a sudden, my mom had to go back to work. And then my sister and I were at home for a few hours by ourselves. We were like the latchkey kids of the
mhm,
80s, right? And so there were times when I heard a lot of negativity growing up because I was not treating my sister kindly or I had gotten in trouble. And my dad is a big negative self talker as well. And so I really have to work hard to silence that voice. And that is something that I think I struggle with constantly is trying to reframe that negative self talk and celebrating myself more. I gave kind of a generic answer to that question earlier about celebrating myself.
mhm.
That's something that's very, very hard for me. And I think it's hard for me because I grew up seeing my dad not talk kindly to himself at times. And so that is I think that's generational. I think
Yeah,
that's really hard to break. And so, I try when I'm working on celebrating things about myself, if I'm not writing, I'm not finding that. And like, so an example is I have this 10-page paper due for grad school next week, and I've really struggled with it. And typically writing comes very naturally to me. Even when it's academic writing, I don't struggle. And so I've been really hard on myself with this piece, but I'm like, okay, I need to just sit down and write and see where that takes me. And so once I did that last week and then a little bit yesterday, I was like, okay, I've got this. I can do this, and some of those positive messages came in. But that's something that I have to be very intentional about.
thank you, Carrie, for being vulnerable and honest. The reason this is a question is unfortunately, it's way too common for us as humans to engage in negative self talk. I don't know why, but I think I've only spoken to a couple of people who don't engage in negative self talk. And those people are quote unquote enlightened spiritually. And so they did the work to get there, but they used to
Right.
struggle with it. And so a couple of things I need you to validate yourself that I hope it's validating. It usually is for me when I know I'm not alone, that it's not just you who struggles with negative self talk. And I love the fact that you are working on it and you are aware of it. It's sad or notable when people aren't aware and so they're not working on it. And so like we're constantly just like beating ourselves up versus knowing it. We're slowly getting better. So kudos to you, Carrie. Just a couple more questions and then
Okay.
you'll be out of the hot seat. I think you answered this one kind of, but I'm going to ask it to see if you have a different answer. What is the
Okay.
healthiest thing you've done for yourself? And I know you told me what you're most proud of, but I'm wondering what is the healthiest thing you've done for yourself?
Sure. I think the healthiest thing I've done for myself is probably really cutting back on my drinking. I grew up in a family where alcohol was readily available at a young age. It was very socially acceptable in my family to drink. A lot of our social activities involved a lot of drinking. And my sister is almost 2 years sober. And my
Congratulations.
last relationship I dated somebody who was sober as well. And so I think that I have really cut back on how much I drink the last several years. One, it makes me feel like crap. And two, it's just not the space I go to feel like I'm solving problems. We know that it doesn't help or solve problems. It's temporary. And so I think, yeah, cutting back on the alcohol, other ways to cope with stress and cope with the challenges that life throws at us.
Yeah. Because it does.
Yeah.
I think that is a huge accomplishment, Carrie, and I'm glad that you said that it's a healthy thing that you've done for yourself because it is. It's not easy. I've shared several times that both of my parents were addicted to alcohol and other substances. And so I grew up around that. And so I'm very proud of you because it is something that you can do all of your life. I've seen it.
Yeah.
Drinking and never stopping and never decreasing even. The fact that you decrease the amounts is great. And I'm so proud of you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Last question. Do you have any parting words or thoughts before we end the episode?
Okay. I think I want to tell this story. So I know I spoke about a lot of some of the trauma that I faced in life, and I think that the event in my life that really shifted my thinking and helped me be more self-reflective and be more forgiving was when I broke my back cliff jumping in 2011. We were at Lake Pleasant, and my friends, I was with my partner at the time and some of their friends, and they were all drinking and having a good time, and I don't sit still very well. And so I had been watching these guys climb up the side of the cliff and jump into the lake. And so they did it from a very low elevation. I think it was like maybe 10 or 20 feet. And I'm like, oh, I can do that. No problem. So I'm like, no, that's not for me. And then this guy climbs this like 50-foot cliff and jumps. And I'm like, I'm going to do that. So I borrowed my friend's shoes. I scale the side of this cliff and I get up there and I'm like, oh, that's really far. But at this point, I'm like, how am I going to get down? And so I jumped and I landed in a seated position. And so I landed with like my feet, instead of like a pencil, with my feet up. And I literally blew out the shorts I was wearing, the seam of my shorts. And I compressed my T11 vertebrae, or no, my T11 vertebrae is crooked and my T12 vertebrae is half its size. I had to be air-evac'd out to St. Joe's, where I got incredible quick care. But I was in the hospital for 4 days. I was required to lay flat on my back for 3 months. And as a result, I was really, really depressed. And I had PTSD. I was diagnosed with PTSD from it. And so I put myself through therapy, and, I missed the whole first quarter of the school year, and it was the first time in my adult life where I really had to rely on people for help. And so my mom, my partner at the time, my sister were my caretakers because I couldn't lift anything over 10 pounds. I had to walk with a walker the first amount of pain for a while, and I had a tortoise shell that I had to wear when I was out and walking around in public. And of course, along with the PTSD and the depression, I had a lot of suicidal thoughts. So I reached out to a mentor who, excuse me, was incredible in terms of coming up with ideas of how I could spend my time, because I hadn't been out of the classroom for any length of time at that point. And so we decided that I should start a blog. And so I did. I wrote 60 words about teaching in a matter of a few months. And that gave me a sense of purpose again, to me think about work, even though I couldn't be in the classroom. And so I think that my parting words would be that we are not in this journey alone. And we have to set our ego aside at some point and accept the roles that people play in our lives and the help and the support and the love that they're willing to give us. And I think if we have that mindset, love just comes pouring in, right? Like I'm so lucky, one, that I'm not paralyzed. I don't have any long-term effects from that injury. I didn't die. And so it really slowed me down and shifted my mindset, because I was not as kind of a person back then, and I had all this kindness and all this love that people were willing to give me, and I'm very, very fortunate for that. I feel very privileged to have that in my life. So I think being open to what what are people's roles in our lives? Are they, if they're a friend, if they're your partner, if they're a family member, what their capacities are for what they are willing to share with you, I think is huge.
I love that.
Thanks.
And I don't have anything to add to that. I think that was so beautifully said that we will end there. Thank you
Okay.
for being a
Yes.
guest on Resilient Life. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for being so open and honest and vulnerable to inspire other people who hear your story to increase their resiliency, to not give up, to be more self-reflective. Thank you for those things, Carrie. And thank you
Thank you
everyone
so
for
much.
watching Resilient Life.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been my pleasure.
I hope this episode gave you some tools to connect with and increase your resiliency. I'm proud of you. Let's keep up the momentum. Follow Resilient Life on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube at Resilient Life Podcast. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.